The grand ballroom sparkled like a jewel box under crystal chandeliers. Victoria Ashford moved through the crowd with the grace of a dancer. Her silver dress caught the light with every step she took. The fabric whispered softly as she walked across the marble floor. Men in expensive suits turned their heads to watch her pass. Women in designer gowns smiled and nodded as she greeted them with a warm voice. Victoria looked like she belonged in a fairy tale. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect style that showed off her delicate neck. Diamond earrings caught the light when she turned her head. Her makeup was flawless without looking heavy. She carried herself like a princess at her own royal ball. Nobody would ever guess that the elegant woman before them could break a man's neck with her bare hands. The French ambassador's wife hurried over with a bright smile. She wore too much perfume and spoke in a voice that was too loud for the fancy setting. Victoria smiled back and spoke in a soft tone that made people lean closer to hear her words. She had practiced this voice for years until it became natural. The sweet, gentle sound hid the fact that she could give military commands that would make soldiers jump to attention. "Victoria, darling, you look absolutely stunning tonight," the ambassador's wife gushed. She held a glass of champagne in one hand and waved the other around as she talked. "That dress must have cost a fortune. Where did you find such a beautiful piece?" Victoria touched the fabric of her dress with delicate fingers. The truth was that the dress had been specially made with hidden pockets for weapons and communication devices. But she would never share that information with anyone at this party. "Oh, this little thing," Victoria said with a soft laugh. "I picked it up at a boutique in Paris last month. I was there for an art auction and couldn't resist." She spoke like shopping was her biggest worry in life. Like her greatest challenge was choosing between different shades of lipstick. The lie came easily after years of practice. She had been in Paris that month, but not for shopping. She had been tracking a weapons dealer who sold bombs to terrorists. The mission had ended with the dealer floating face down in the Seine River. But nobody at this party would ever know about that dark chapter of her recent past. More people gathered around Victoria. As the evening continued, they all wanted to talk to the mysterious woman who seemed to know about art and culture and expensive things. She listened to their stories about charity work and vacation plans. She laughed at their jokes even when they were not funny. She asked questions about their children and their hobbies like she really cared about the answers. But while she smiled and chatted, Victoria was also working. Her trained eyes noticed every security guard in the room. She counted the exits and memorized which doors led where. She watched the patterns of the serving staff and noted which guests seemed nervous or out of place. Her mind filed away every detail that might be useful later. A tall man with gray hair approached their group. He wore a military uniform covered with medals and ribbons. His posture was straight and his eyes were sharp. This was General Morrison, a man who had spent 40 years in the army. Victoria had read his file many times. She knew he was here tonight because his daughter was getting married next month. "Ladies, you all look lovely this evening," the general said with a formal bow. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "I hope you're enjoying the party." Victoria stepped forward with a shy smile. She made her voice even softer than usual. "General Morrison, it's such an honor to meet you. I've heard so many wonderful things about your service to our country." The general's stern expression softened. Like most men, he found it hard to resist Victoria's combination of beauty and innocence. "You're very kind, Miss Ashford. Victoria Ashford." She held out her hand like she expected him to kiss it rather than shake it. "My father collects military history books. He would be so excited to know I met you." This was another lie wrapped in truth. Victoria's father had been dead for 10 years, but she had studied military history extensively as part of her training. She knew more about battlefield tactics than most of the soldiers the general commanded, but she would never let him see that knowledge hiding behind her sweet smile. The general took her hand gently like he was afraid he might break her delicate fingers. "Your father has good taste in books, then. Military history is important. We must learn from the past to avoid making the same mistakes." Victoria nodded like this was the wisest thing she had ever heard. Inside her head, she was remembering her last mission, where she had used techniques learned from studying ancient Roman battle formations. But on the outside, she just looked like a pretty woman, hanging on every word from an important man. The conversation continued for several more minutes. The general told stories about his time in different countries. Victoria responded with questions that made her seem curious but not too intelligent. She had learned that men liked women who were interested in their stories but not smart enough to challenge their opinions. As the evening wore on, Victoria felt her phone vibrate against her leg. The device was hidden in a special pocket sewn into her dress. Only one person had the number for that phone. Only one person would contact her during a social event like this. The message would be brief and coded, but it would change everything about her carefully planned evening. She excused herself from the group with apologetic smiles. "I'm so sorry, but I need to powder my nose. All this champagne, you know." The other women laughed and nodded like they understood completely. Men looked uncomfortable at the mention of female needs and turned their attention elsewhere. Victoria walked toward the ladies' room with the same graceful steps she had used all evening. But inside her chest, her heart was beating faster. After months of playing the helpless socialite, she was about to become something else entirely. The elegant mask she wore so well was about to slip away to reveal the deadly truth underneath. Tomorrow the world would see Victoria Ashford in a completely different light. But tonight she was still the perfect picture of feminine grace and beauty. Still the woman that nobody would ever suspect of being capable of violence or danger. The woman who was too elegant and refined for anything more challenging than choosing the right wine with dinner. The elegant bathroom in the embassy felt like a cage around Victoria. She locked the door behind her and moved to the large mirror above the marble sink. The woman looking back at her appeared fragile and innocent. But Victoria knew the truth about what lived beneath that perfect surface. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the hidden phone sewn into her dress. The message was waiting for her in bright letters on the small screen. 3 simple words that would change her entire world. Operation Black Rose was active. Victoria had been waiting for this moment for 8 long months. 8 months of pretending to be weak when she was actually one of the most dangerous people in the room. She read the message 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. Then she pressed a button and watched the words disappear forever. The phone would destroy itself in exactly 10 minutes. By then, she needed to be back at the party acting like nothing had happened, acting like she was still the same helpless woman who needed men to open doors for her. Victoria fixed her lipstick with steady hands. The face in the mirror showed no signs of the excitement building inside her chest. Years of training had taught her to control every muscle and every expression. She could smile sweetly while planning how to kill everyone in the room. She could giggle at stupid jokes while counting exit routes and weapon possibilities. The party was still going strong when she returned to the ballroom. The ambassador's wife rushed over with a fresh glass of champagne. She was talking about a charity event next month that needed volunteers. Victoria nodded and smiled while her mind worked on completely different problems. How long would it take to get home? What weapons would she need? How many people might die if she failed this mission? "Victoria, darling, you look a bit pale," the ambassador's wife said with concern in her voice. "Are you feeling all right tonight?" Victoria put one hand to her forehead like she was checking for fever. "I think I might be getting a small headache. All this excitement, you know. Maybe I should head home early and get some rest." The older woman made sympathetic sounds and insisted that Victoria should take care of herself. She promised to call a driver and make sure Victoria got home safely. This kind of concern always amazed Victoria. People were so willing to help someone they thought was weak and helpless. They never wondered if that weakness might be completely fake. The ride home took exactly 28 minutes through the quiet city streets. Victoria sat in the back seat and looked out at the buildings passing by. Normal people were sleeping in those buildings. Families with children who went to school and parents who worked regular jobs. None of them knew that their safety depended on people like Victoria. People who lived double lives and did terrible things to protect innocent strangers. Her house stood at the end of a long driveway surrounded by tall trees. From the outside, it looked like the home of a wealthy woman who cared about gardens and decorating. The neighbors thought Victoria spent her days reading books and planning charity events. They had no idea what really happened behind those elegant walls. The front door closed behind her with a soft click. Victoria walked through rooms filled with expensive furniture and beautiful art. Everything was perfect and tasteful, just like her public image. But this was only the surface level of her carefully constructed life. The real Victoria lived in the basement where nobody could see her true nature. She pressed her hand against a hidden panel beside her bedroom fireplace. The wall moved aside to reveal a steel door with an electronic lock. Victoria entered a 12-digit code and waited for the scanner to read her fingerprint. Then she walked down concrete steps into a world that would shock anyone who knew her socialite identity. The basement was divided into 3 separate rooms. The first contained exercise equipment that could train someone for military combat. Heavy bags hung from the ceiling beside weight machines and running tracks. The second room held computers with access to government databases and satellite communications. The third room was an armory that would make most soldiers jealous. Victoria changed from her elegant dress into black clothing designed for combat situations. The silk and diamonds were replaced by tactical gear that could stop bullets and hide weapons. She pulled her blonde hair back into a tight ponytail and washed off the delicate makeup. The transformation took less than 10 minutes, but the result was shocking. The woman who emerged from the changing area looked nothing like the socialite from the embassy party. This version of Victoria moved with deadly precision. Her eyes were cold and calculating. Every gesture showed years of training in violence and survival. She was beautiful in a completely different way, beautiful like a sword or a perfectly designed weapon. Victoria spent 2 hours going through her exercise routine. She practiced hand-to-hand combat against computerized opponents. She fired weapons at targets that moved and changed position. She ran through obstacle courses designed to test speed and agility under pressure. By the time she finished, her body was ready for whatever mission waited ahead. At dawn, a new message arrived on her secure communication system. The briefing would happen in 6 hours at a location across the city. Victoria had that much time to prepare her mind and her equipment. She showered and ate a careful meal designed to give her energy without making her sick. Then she selected weapons and tools that could be hidden in normal clothing. The sun was rising as Victoria prepared to leave her house. She looked like an ordinary woman going to a business meeting. Her clothes were simple but expensive. Her makeup was light and natural. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was carrying enough weapons to fight a small war. But as she drove through the morning traffic, Victoria felt the familiar excitement building in her chest. After months of playing a helpless character, she was finally going to be herself again. The real Victoria who could solve problems that normal law enforcement could never handle. The woman who was too elegant for combat but deadly enough to save the world. The government building looked ordinary from the outside, but Victoria knew better. She had been inside many times before on missions that never officially happened. The basement levels held secrets that could change the world if they ever became public. Today she would learn about her most dangerous assignment yet. Director Hayes was waiting in the conference room when Victoria arrived. The man looked tired, like he had not slept in days. Papers covered the table in front of him, and computer screens showed maps of different countries. Victoria could tell this mission was bigger than anything she had handled before. "Agent Ashford, please sit down," Director Hayes said without looking up from his documents. "What I am about to tell you cannot leave this room under any circumstances. The safety of thousands of people depends on complete secrecy." Victoria took a seat across from him and waited for the briefing to begin. She had learned long ago that patience was one of the most important skills for any operative. Rushing into situations without proper information got people killed. She needed to understand everything before she made her first move. Director Hayes pushed 3 photographs across the table. The faces looking back at Victoria were men she had seen before at social events. They smiled in the pictures, but their eyes were cold and calculating. These were predators who used money and power to hunt innocent victims. "Marcus Volkov Chenwei and Roberto Santos," Director Hayes said. 3 arms dealers who have decided to work together. Separately, they are dangerous. Together, they control enough weapons to start several small wars. But that is not why you are here today. Victoria studied the photographs carefully. Marcus Volkov was a tall man with expensive suits and perfect teeth. She remembered dancing with him at a charity ball 6 months ago. He had held her too close and whispered things in her ear that made her skin crawl. At the time, she had played the part of a blushing, innocent girl. Now she wished she had broken his neck when she had the chance. They have acquired something that should not exist. Director Hayes continued. Chemical weapons from a laboratory that was supposed to be destroyed 20 years ago. These weapons are more dangerous than anything we have ever encountered before. The room felt colder as Victoria absorbed this information. Chemical weapons were the worst kind of threat because they could kill civilians without warning. A single container could poison the water supply of an entire city. Children and elderly people would die first while the healthy adults suffered for days before death finally came. "How much do they have?" Victoria asked in a quiet voice. She was not sure she wanted to hear the answer, but she needed to know what they were facing. Director Hayes looked directly into her eyes. Enough to kill 500,000 people. Maybe more if they use it correctly. The buyers are already lined up and ready to pay. Terrorists from 3 different countries want these weapons for attacks on civilian populations. Victoria felt sick to her stomach, but she kept her face calm and professional. This was exactly the kind of threat she had trained her entire career to stop. Innocent people were counting on her even though they would never know her name or what she had done to protect them. The sale is happening tomorrow night, Director Hayes said. They are using a private estate outside the city. The cover story is an auction for rare art and antiques. Most of the guests will be legitimate collectors who have no idea what is really being sold in the basement. This was perfect for Victoria's cover identity. She had attended dozens of art auctions as part of her socialite persona. She knew how to talk about paintings and sculptures like she was an expert collector. The criminals would see exactly what they expected to see. A wealthy woman with more money than sense. Your mission is to infiltrate the auction and locate the chemical weapons, Director Hayes explained. Once you confirm their location, you will signal for backup, and we will move in to secure the site. Under no circumstances are you to attempt to handle this alone. Victoria nodded, but inside her mind she was already making different plans. Backup teams moved slowly and made noise. If something went wrong during the raid, the criminals might have time to release the weapons or escape with them. Sometimes the only way to guarantee success was to work alone and trust your own skills. I will need a complete guest list and floor plans of the estate, Victoria said. Also background information on all the major players who will be attending. I want to know their weaknesses and what motivates them. Director Hayes smiled for the first time since the meeting began. I knew you would want all the details. Everything you need is in this briefcase. Study it carefully, but remember that information is classified at the highest levels. If you are captured or killed, the government will deny any knowledge of this operation. Victoria took the briefcase and felt its weight in her hands. Inside were the tools she would need to save thousands of innocent lives. But first she had to survive long enough to use them. The men she was targeting had killed many people to protect their business interests. They would not hesitate to add one more body to their list. There is one more thing you need to know, Director Hayes said, as Victoria prepared to leave. Marcus Volkov has been asking about you at social events. He seems very interested in the mysterious Miss Ashford who appears at all the best parties but never talks about her background. This was both good news and bad news. Good because it meant her cover identity was working perfectly. Bad because unwanted attention could complicate the mission. Victoria would have to be extra careful not to give herself away while she was inside the auction house. How much time do I have to prepare? Victoria asked. 18 hours, Director Hayes replied. The auction begins at 8 tomorrow evening. You will need to arrive early and establish your cover before the real business begins. Remember, Agent Ashford, the fate of many innocent people rests in your hands. Victoria left the government building with her mind already focused on the mission ahead. She had 18 hours to transform from a deadly operative back into an elegant socialite. 18 hours to prepare for the most dangerous night of her career. The men she was hunting thought they were untouchable because they hid behind money and social status. Tomorrow night they would learn how wrong they were about that assumption. The drive home gave her time to think about strategy and contingency plans. Victoria knew that missions rarely went according to the original plan. She needed to be ready for anything that might happen once she walked into that auction house. The chemical weapons had to be secured before they could fall into the wrong hands. Failure was not an option when so many lives hung in the balance. Victoria stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the emerald green dress that would either save her life or get her killed. The silk fabric felt cool against her skin, but underneath the elegant exterior were hidden pockets containing tools that could end a man's life in seconds. She had spent 3 hours getting ready for this auction, and every detail had to be perfect. The estate was located 30 miles outside the city, surrounded by forests and private roads. Victoria drove through the iron gates at exactly 7:30 in the evening. Other expensive cars were already parked in the circular driveway. Men in dark suits helped elegant women step out of luxury vehicles. Everyone looked wealthy and sophisticated, but Victoria wondered how many of them knew about the real business happening tonight. The mansion looked like something from a fairy tale with tall windows and stone columns. Warm light spilled onto the front steps where guests were arriving in small groups. Victoria walked up the stairs with the confident grace of someone who belonged at events like this. Her high heels clicked against marble as uniformed servants opened the massive front doors. Inside the mansion, art covered every wall from floor to ceiling. Paintings by famous masters hung beside ancient sculptures and rare artifacts. Classical music played softly while servers in white jackets offered champagne and small appetizers. Victoria accepted a glass of wine and began moving through the crowd like she was genuinely interested in purchasing expensive art. The legitimate auction was taking place in the main ballroom where an auctioneer was selling paintings to wealthy collectors. Victoria watched for a few minutes and applauded politely when someone bought a landscape painting for more money than most people earned in a year. But her real attention was focused on identifying the key players in tonight's criminal enterprise. Marcus Volkov appeared at her elbow like a shadow materializing from thin air. He was even more handsome than Victoria remembered, with dark hair and expensive clothes that fit perfectly. His smile was charming, but his eyes were cold and calculating. This was a man who viewed other people as objects to be used for his own benefit. "Miss Ashford, what a delightful surprise to see you here tonight," Marcus said in a smooth voice, with just a hint of a Russian accent. "I had hoped we might meet again after that wonderful charity ball last month." Victoria turned toward him with a bright smile that hid her true thoughts. "Mr. Volkov, how lovely to see you again. I heard there might be some very special pieces available tonight. Items that are not normally offered to the general public." His eyes grew more interested at her words. Marcus had been wondering about this mysterious woman who appeared at high society events, but never seemed to have a clear background or family connections. Now she was hinting that she might be interested in the kind of merchandise he really dealt in. "Perhaps we should take a private tour of the estate," Marcus suggested. "There are some remarkable collections in the lower levels that might interest a discerning buyer like yourself." This was exactly what Victoria had hoped would happen. Marcus was going to take her directly to where the chemical weapons were being stored. She would finally be able to confirm their location and figure out how to stop the sale from happening. But she also knew that once she went downstairs with him, she would be in extreme danger. "That sounds fascinating," Victoria replied with the enthusiasm of someone who collected dangerous things as a hobby. "I have been looking for something truly unique to add to my private collection." They left the main party and walked down a marble hallway lined with more expensive artwork. Victoria memorized every door and window they passed. She needed to know all possible escape routes in case something went wrong. Her training had taught her that preparation was the difference between success and death in situations like this. The elevator they entered required a special key card to access the basement levels. As they descended, Victoria felt her heart beating faster with anticipation and adrenaline. She was about to see weapons that could kill hundreds of thousands of people. The responsibility of stopping their sale weighed heavily on her shoulders. The basement was nothing like the elegant mansion above. Here the walls were concrete and steel with bright fluorescent lights that hurt the eyes. Armed guards stood at every intersection checking identification and watching for signs of trouble. Victoria kept her expression calm and interested, like she was used to seeing security at private auctions. Marcus led her through several rooms filled with illegal weapons and stolen artifacts. Victoria saw military-grade rifles that belonged to government forces and ancient treasures that had been stolen from museums around the world. Everything here represented violence and theft, but she had to act like it was all perfectly normal. Finally, they reached a temperature-controlled vault where the real merchandise was being displayed. Victoria felt sick when she saw the chemical weapons containers sitting on metal shelves like bottles of expensive wine. Each container held enough poison to wipe out entire neighborhoods. The labels were written in Russian, but she recognized the symbols that warned of deadly contents. "These are the crown jewels of tonight's auction," Marcus explained with obvious pride in his voice. "Former Soviet military research that was supposed to be destroyed decades ago. Instead, it found its way to collectors who appreciate its true value." Victoria nodded and made appreciative sounds while her mind worked on tactical problems. How many guards were in the basement? Where were the security cameras located? What would be the fastest way to get these weapons away from potential buyers? She had to appear fascinated by the merchandise while secretly planning how to destroy Marcus and his operation. "The bidding starts at $10 million per container," Marcus continued. "But I expect the final prices will be much higher once our international clients see what they are getting for their money." Other potential buyers were arriving in the vault now. Victoria recognized some faces from intelligence briefings she had studied. These were terrorists and criminals from around the world who wanted chemical weapons for attacks on innocent civilians. The auction was about to begin and she was running out of time to stop it. Victoria smiled at Marcus and pretended to examine the weapons containers more closely. But inside her mind she was preparing for what came next. The elegant socialite mask was about to come off and reveal the deadly operative underneath. Tonight's masquerade was almost over, and the real action was about to begin. The auction began at exactly 9 o'clock in the underground vault. Victoria stood among 20 of the world's most dangerous criminals, while Marcus Volkov prepared to sell weapons that could destroy entire cities. She maintained her elegant, socialite mask, but inside her mind was calculating distances and counting enemies. The time for pretending was almost over. A man in an expensive suit stepped forward to begin the bidding. He spoke with a Middle Eastern accent and represented terrorist groups that wanted to attack civilian populations. Victoria recognized him from intelligence photos as someone responsible for bombing schools and hospitals. Her fingers twitched with the desire to end his life immediately, but she forced herself to wait for the right moment. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we offer you the finest collection of chemical weapons ever assembled, the auctioneer announced. Each container holds enough material to eliminate large population centers. The bidding will start at $10 million per unit. Victoria watched hands go up around the room as buyers competed for the deadly merchandise. These people were bargaining for the lives of innocent children and families who would never know how close they came to dying tonight. The amounts being offered grew higher and higher while Victoria's anger burned like fire in her chest. Marcus Volkov stood beside her looking proud of the business he had created. He had no idea that the elegant woman next to him was planning to destroy everything he had worked for. Victoria turned toward him with a sweet smile that hid her true intentions completely. "This is absolutely fascinating," Victoria whispered to Marcus. "I had no idea such remarkable items were available to private collectors. You must be very well connected to acquire merchandise like this." Marcus smiled back with obvious satisfaction. He was enjoying the attention from this beautiful, mysterious woman who seemed impressed by his criminal empire. "My dear Miss Ashford, you have only seen the beginning. After tonight's sale, I will have connections that reach every corner of the globe." The bidding was reaching critical levels when Victoria made her move. She excused herself to use the bathroom and walked calmly toward the exit. 2 guards watched her leave, but they saw only a wealthy woman in an expensive dress. They had no reason to suspect that she was actually the most dangerous person in the building. Victoria found the bathroom and locked the door behind her. Then she reached into hidden pockets in her dress and began removing the tools she would need for what came next. The elegant socialite was about to transform into something completely different. Something that would terrify every criminal in that underground vault. The transformation took less than 2 minutes. Victoria's hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and her makeup was wiped away to reveal the hard expression underneath. She removed her high-heeled shoes and replaced them with silent rubber-soled boots that had been hidden in her purse. Small weapons appeared from concealed pockets and were attached to her body in places where they could be reached quickly. When Victoria emerged from the bathroom, she moved like a completely different person. Gone was the graceful socialite who needed men to open doors for her. In her place was a deadly operative who could kill trained soldiers with her bare hands. The change was so complete that even people who knew her might not recognize her now. Victoria made her way back toward the auction room using routes she had memorized during her tour with Marcus. The guards she passed barely glanced at her because she still wore the same green dress. They saw what they expected to see and missed the subtle changes that marked her transformation from victim to predator. The auction was reaching its climax when Victoria appeared in the doorway. Marcus was about to close the sale that would put chemical weapons into the hands of international terrorists. Victoria could not allow that to happen under any circumstances. Too many innocent lives depended on what she did in the next few minutes. Victoria stepped into the room, and the change in atmosphere was immediate. Something about her presence made people turn and stare even though they could not identify what was different. The elegant woman they had seen earlier was gone, and in her place stood someone who radiated danger like heat from a fire. Marcus noticed her first because he had been watching for her return. But the woman walking toward him was not the same person who had left the room 10 minutes earlier. This version of Victoria moved with deadly purpose, and her eyes were cold as winter ice. Marcus felt fear creep up his spine as he realized he had made a terrible mistake. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced in a voice that carried complete authority, "this auction is now closed permanently." The room erupted into chaos as criminals reached for weapons and guards moved to protect their employers. But Victoria was already moving faster than anyone could react. She flowed through the crowd like water around stones, and everywhere she passed, men fell unconscious or dead. Her years of training had prepared her for exactly this kind of situation. The first guard to reach her found himself on the floor before he could draw his weapon. The second guard managed to pull his gun, but Victoria disarmed him with movements too quick to follow. Marcus Volkov backed against the wall as he watched his security team fall one by one to this woman he had thought was harmless. Within 3 minutes, the room was silent except for Victoria's calm breathing. 20 of the world's most dangerous criminals lay unconscious or dead around the chemical weapons containers. The auction that would have put weapons of mass destruction into terrorist hands was finished forever. Victoria looked at Marcus Volkov, who was pressed against the wall with terror in his eyes. The man who had built a criminal empire through violence and intimidation was now face to face with someone more deadly than anyone he had ever encountered. "You made one mistake tonight, Marcus," Victoria said in a voice as cold as her expression. "You assumed that elegance meant weakness. That assumption just destroyed everything you built." Marcus tried to speak, but no words came out of his mouth. The elegant socialite he had tried to impress was actually his worst nightmare come to life. Victoria Ashford was not a helpless victim, but a deadly weapon disguised as a beautiful woman. Government agents stormed into the room exactly 4 minutes later to find Victoria standing calmly among the unconscious criminals. The chemical weapons were secure, and the terrorist buyers would never threaten innocent people again. The mission was complete, and thousands of lives had been saved. Director Hayes arrived to oversee the cleanup operation and found Victoria back in her socialite persona. She had fixed her hair and reapplied her makeup and looked once again like someone who spent her time at charity events and museum openings. The transformation was so complete that it seemed impossible she had just defeated an entire room of armed criminals. "Outstanding work, Agent Ashford," Director Hayes said with genuine admiration in his voice. "Your cover identity was perfect for this mission. They never suspected what you really were until it was too late." Victoria smiled with the same sweet expression she had used at embassy parties and charity galas, but now Director Hayes could see the deadly truth that lived beneath that elegant surface. The world's most dangerous criminals had made the same mistake that everyone else made about Victoria Ashford. They assumed that beauty and grace meant helplessness and weakness. That assumption had cost them everything while saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Victoria would go back to attending art auctions and charity events, where people would continue to see her as nothing more than a pretty decoration. They would never know that their safety depended on elegant women, who were far more dangerous than they appeared. The legend of Victoria Ashford would live on in classified files and whispered stories among intelligence operatives. But to the rest of the world, she remained exactly what she had always seemed to be, too elegant for combat and too refined for violence. The perfect cover for the deadliest agent in the world. 3 weeks after the chemical weapons auction, Victoria sat in her favorite coffee shop reading a book about Renaissance art. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, while other customers chatted quietly about their normal everyday problems. Nobody in the cafe knew that the elegant woman at table 7 had recently saved 500,000 lives from a terrorist attack. The newspaper, on the table beside her coffee cup, carried a small story about a fire at a private estate outside the city. The official report blamed faulty electrical wiring for the blaze that destroyed the mansion and killed several guests. There was no mention of chemical weapons or international arms dealers or underground auctions. The government had done its job of keeping the truth hidden from the public. Victoria turned a page in her art book and smiled at a painting of angels dancing in clouds. The irony was not lost on her that she spent her days studying beautiful things while her nights were filled with violence and death. Most people could never understand how someone could live such a divided existence, but Victoria had learned to find peace in the contrast. Her phone buzzed with a text. Message from the ambassador's wife inviting her to lunch next week. The older woman wanted to discuss plans for a charity fundraiser that would help children in poor countries. Victoria typed back an enthusiastic response accepting the invitation. Playing the role of a caring socialite had become second nature to her after years of practice. But as she walked home from the coffee shop, Victoria noticed things that other people missed completely. The man reading a newspaper on the park bench was actually watching her apartment building. The woman walking her dog had been behind her for 3 blocks making the same turns. Someone was following her, and that meant her cover might be compromised. Victoria continued walking at the same casual pace while her mind analyzed the surveillance team. There were at least 4 people tracking her movements using professional techniques. This was not random criminal activity or foreign intelligence gathering. These people knew exactly who they were watching, and they had resources that suggested government backing. She led her followers through a route that would test their skills and reveal their intentions. Victoria window shopped at expensive stores and stopped to admire flowers in the park. To anyone watching, she looked like a wealthy woman with nothing more important to do than spend money and enjoy beautiful things. But Victoria was actually using reflections in store windows and glass surfaces to count her watchers and identify their positions. She memorized faces and clothing and equipment. By the time she reached her front door, she knew exactly who was following her and what kind of threat they represented. The apartment building lobby was empty when Victoria entered, but she could feel eyes watching from hidden positions. Cameras were recording her every movement, and people were analyzing her behavior for signs that she knew about the surveillance. This was a test of some kind, but Victoria was not sure who was giving it or why. Victoria took the elevator to her floor and walked to her apartment door with the same graceful steps she used at embassy parties. Her key turned in the lock and she stepped inside to find Director Hayes sitting in her living room like he owned the place. This was not a social visit, and Victoria felt her body automatically shift into combat readiness. "Agent Ashford, please sit down," Director Hayes said in a tone that was all business. "We need to discuss your future with the agency and some concerns that have been raised about your recent performance." Victoria remained standing near the door with easy access to weapons hidden throughout her apartment. Years of training had taught her to be suspicious when superiors arranged unexpected meetings in private locations. Too many agents had disappeared after similar conversations with people they trusted. "What kind of concerns?" Victoria asked in a voice that gave away nothing about her emotional state. She kept her body language relaxed and non-threatening while preparing for whatever might come next. Director Hayes opened a folder filled with photographs and documents. Victoria recognized pictures of herself at various social events over the past 6 months. Someone had been watching her long before the chemical weapons mission and building a detailed file on her activities and associations. "Some people in Washington think you have become too comfortable in your cover identity," Director Hayes explained. "They worry that you are losing the edge that makes you effective as an operative. The socialite persona may be becoming more real than the agent underneath." This accusation hit Victoria like a physical blow, even though she kept her expression neutral. The suggestion that she was going soft or losing her killer instinct was the worst thing anyone could say about an operative. It meant they questioned her loyalty and her ability to complete future missions. "My performance record speaks for itself," Victoria replied with quiet confidence. The chemical weapons mission was completed successfully with minimal collateral damage. The targets were neutralized and the weapons were secured exactly as ordered. Director Hayes nodded, but his expression remained serious. "Nobody questions your success rate, Agent Ashford. But success is not the only measure we use to evaluate our people. We also look at methods and motivations and psychological profiles." He pulled out a psychological evaluation that made Victoria's blood run cold. Some government psychiatrist had been analyzing her behavior and drawing conclusions about her mental state. The report suggested that she was becoming too attached to her cover identity and losing the ruthless efficiency that made her valuable. "Dr. Martinez believes you may be experiencing what he calls identity displacement," Director Hayes continued. "The elegant socialite personality is starting to override the trained killer. He recommends immediate reassignment to break the pattern before it becomes permanent." Victoria felt anger building in her chest, but she kept it hidden behind her practiced mask of calm control. Some desk-bound psychiatrist who had never killed anyone was questioning her dedication and professional abilities. The man had never faced armed terrorists or made life-and-death decisions with seconds to spare. Where would I be reassigned? Victoria asked, even though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer. Director Hayes looked uncomfortable for the first time since arriving at her apartment. Deep cover in Eastern Europe. Industrial espionage and political assassination. Very different from the social infiltration work you have been doing here. The message was clear. Victoria was being punished for being too successful at her current assignment. The agency wanted to take away the cover identity she had spent years perfecting and force her to start over in a completely different role. They were breaking up a winning team because some psychiatrist had theories about her psychological state. I need time to consider this offer, Victoria said carefully. She wanted to tell Director Hayes exactly what she thought about his reassignment, but that would only confirm their suspicions about her losing professional objectivity. Director Hayes stood and walked toward the door. You have 48 hours to decide, Agent Ashford. After that, the decision will be made for you. I hope you choose to accept the transfer voluntarily because the alternative would be much less pleasant for everyone involved. After he left, Victoria stood alone in her apartment, feeling the weight of an impossible choice. She could accept reassignment and abandon the life she had built here, or she could refuse and face whatever consequences the agency had in mind for uncooperative agents. Outside her window, the city continued its normal rhythm while Victoria contemplated a decision that would determine the rest of her life. The elegant socialite and the deadly operative were about to be separated forever. The question was which identity would survive and which one would disappear into the shadows where secrets went to die. Victoria poured herself a glass of wine and sat down to think about her future. Tomorrow she would have to choose between the woman she appeared to be and the woman she really was. The agency had given her an ultimatum, but they had also made one critical mistake. They had forgotten that the most dangerous agents were the ones with nothing left to lose.